On May 12, 2018, a pair of teenagers entered the Yosemite Trail and disappeared without a trace. A month later, biologists came across a fallen tree, under the roots of which a gaunt girl was sitting, clutching a man's sweater. You will find out what happened to her and where her boyfriend went in today's video. Enjoy the video. Some names and details in this story have been changed for anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photographs are from the actual scene. On May 12, 2018, at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, a minivan pulled into a parking lot near Getch Getchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park. According to the mother, on this particular day, her 17-year-old daughter, Nancy Anderson, and 19-year-old Jay Brown planned to hike the popular Wapama Falls Trail and return by 16 o'clock. But the mother insisted that she would wait for them until 16:30, or, in case of a delay, 16:40. Ranger logbook entries indicate that Nancy and Jay were seen near the dam at approximately 9:20, heading toward the trailhead. They were both carrying light backpacks, dressed in summer hiking attire, and their demeanor, according to a passing witness, was calm, relaxed, with no signs of excitement or conflict. The first warning signs appeared at 16:00 when a mother waiting in the parking lot noticed that her daughter's phone was going to voicemail. The calls were repeated at intervals of several minutes, but the result was the same. At 16:35, she contacted the rangers, registering a report of a minor's delay on the route. According to the protocol, the search should have officially started only after a certain time after the set return time. But given the girl's age and the change in weather conditions above the dam, the station management decided to act immediately. Already at 20 o'clock on the same day, the first group of rangers set off in the direction of the waterfall with thermal imaging equipment. The weather changed dramatically. Clouds covered the canyon, the wind picked up from the reservoir, and visibility in some areas dropped to a few dozen yards. These conditions were typical for May evenings in Yosemite, but created serious obstacles for nighttime searches. According to internal reports from the rescue service, over the next 2 days, more than 3 dozen specialists worked in the Getch Getcha area: dog handlers, technical climbers, and divers. The search dogs picked up the initial trail on the concrete surface of the dam, but half a mile from the trail, it branched off and then broke off completely on a rocky outcrop. During the interview, one of the dog handlers noted that the scent was unstable, as if a person had been walking along the trail for some time and then seemed to have disappeared from the surface. The exact interpretation of such dog behavior in such cases can never be unambiguous, but it was the first of many signals that the disappearance did not fit the typical scenario. Divers were working in parallel. Downstream of the dam, in an area where the current was particularly strong, they checked the banks and underwater recesses. No clues were found. According to the rules, water searches were conducted only during the daylight hours, and with each passing day, the chance of finding at least a fragment of the items decreased. On the evening of May 15th, the temperature dropped sharply, and the rain that lasted several hours washed away most of the traces from the soil. During an official briefing on May 16th, a rescue service representative said that Wapam's route was not among the most dangerous in Yosemite, but had several areas with potential rock instability, especially after rain. According to him, if a couple went off the trail for even a few dozen yards, they could get sucked into one of the crevasses, of which there are many. At the time, this was the main working version. However, by May 17th, the expanded search sector covered more than 10 miles of territory, including areas where hikers had fallen before. All these places were thoroughly checked to no avail. Units with technical equipment descended into several deep cracks in the rock mass, but found no sign of Nancy or Jay. Reports indicate that even in the case of a fall from a great height, fragments of clothing or belongings are usually left behind, but there was nothing here. The Ranger Service psychologist who worked with the girl's mother recorded the woman's words that Nancy never strayed far from the route, had no tendency to engage in risky behavior, and always followed directions strictly. This only added to the bewilderment of how an experienced safety instructor who had lectured at the school could so easily disappear in a familiar sector of the park. On May 19th, volunteers from surrounding towns and orienteering groups familiar with the inaccessible areas around the reservoir joined the operation. Experienced climbers equipped several teams with radio communications and rope systems, but despite expanding the route, the search kept returning to the same point, a rocky scree where the dog's trail suddenly disappeared. This local dead zone raised many questions. Experts in mountainous terrain suggested that the pair might have taken an unobvious branch that was not marked on the route diagrams. Others believed that someone or something could have interrupted their journey suddenly, perhaps a falling rock, perhaps contact with a wild animal. But none of the theories explained the complete lack of physical evidence. On May 23, when the rains again covered the Getch-Getcha area, the active search was temporarily suspended. The official reason for the suspension of the operation was extremely low probability of finding any new traces due to weather conditions and exhausted resources. The internal notes, however, stated that the nature of the disappearance does not fit the standard patterns of incidents on the Waupun route and that further scenarios beyond typical accidents should be considered. However, the public version given to the public remained restrained, a likely fall into the water or one of the many nearby gorges. The family perceived this as a formality. They repeatedly said in conversations with the press that it was impossible for two people to simply disappear on a route used by hundreds of tourists every day. It was as if the park had swallowed them up, quietly, without witnesses, without a single clue. But this very silence, as it would turn out later, was not a sign of tragedy, but the beginning of a much more complicated story. Exactly 1 month has passed since the disappearance. On June 14, 2018, at about 11 o'clock in the morning, a group of National Park Service field biologists were conducting routine monitoring of forest bird populations in a sector officially closed to the public due to the danger of falling trees. The reports indicate that the site was considered difficult to access, and the routes to it ran through dense undergrowth that had not been cleared for years. It was there that the researchers spotted a massive fallen ponderosa pine uprooted by the roots after recent rainstorms. According to one of the biologists, when they passed the tree, they first heard an uncharacteristic breathing, or wheezing, but thought it might be an injured animal. It was only when they approached the rhizome that they saw a human figure moving among the clods of soil and root fragments. The person was wrapped in an old, tattered tarpaulin with branches on top of it that had probably fallen with the tree. The researchers immediately called the rangers, but tried to check the person's condition before they arrived. The scientists recall that the girl hardly reacted to the calls, only flinched when they approached and did not open her hands, which were clutching a dark green men's sweatshirt. She was identified on the spot as 17-year-old Nancy Anderson, who was reported missing a month ago. The report of the paramedic who first examined the girl stated, "The degree of exhaustion is medium, signs of prolonged dehydration, but no critical condition of organs. There are no visible signs of struggle or fractures on the body. Reaction to external stimuli is slow." Nancy was so disoriented that she could not get up on her own, so she was evacuated on a stretcher using the shortest route to the official car. Almost immediately after her discovery, the area around the fallen pine tree was fenced off with tape, and rangers marked the location on internal maps. Special attention was paid to the fact that the girl was in a sector that has no official access from the Waupun Trail, and the path to it is difficult even for park employees. The memos state that it would have been extremely difficult for an untrained person to move here, especially given the lack of trails and numerous debris. The documents also emphasized that the girl's condition did not correspond to the typical appearance of those who had been in the mountains for a long time without food. She was weakened, but without signs of deep cachexia, which is typical in such cases. She was not wearing protective clothing against the rain, only a t-shirt and light pants. The shoes were preserved, although they were covered in fuel oil and clay, which could indicate prolonged movement in hard-to-reach areas. Particular attention was paid to the green sweatshirt that Nancy did not let go of. The staff members who were present during the evacuation noted in their reports that the girl would not allow the clothes to be touched and reacted with sudden movements to any attempt to take them away. At the time of the discovery, it was not known who the sweatshirt belonged to, but it later became clear that it was Jay Brown's, her boyfriend, who was not found nearby. After the evacuation, the girl was taken to a hospital in a town near the park. The doctors who conducted the initial examination recorded in the documents: pronounced psycho-emotional stress, periodic tremors, avoidance of eye contact. According to the medical staff, Nancy repeated unformulated words and phrases several times, including some references to forest and fear. At the same time, she could not give any logical answers and was not oriented in time. The news of her discovery spread instantly. In the first few hours, the National Park Service's internal channels only reported brief information about the discovery of a person missing since May. But the story was reported in the national media a day later. According to a park spokesperson who gave an official comment that evening, "The case of survival for such a long time without special equipment is atypical and requires additional assessment by specialists." At that time, no details were passed on to the investigation, only confirmation that the girl's condition was stable. In parallel with the medical examination, investigators began work at the site of the discovery. The area where Nancy was found was examined in detail. They took pictures of the rhizome, the footprints around it, and the tarpaulin she was wrapped in. Several shoe prints were found on the soil surface, but due to the wet soil and mixed footprints, biologists could not determine their origin. No additional items or signs that another person had been there were found. Particular attention was paid to the tarpaulin. It was old, dirty, with numerous scuffs, and did not belong to any of the park services. It had no markings typical of national inventories. From the outside, it looked like the tarp had been in the forest for a long time before it was used. No one could say how the girl ended up there. The foresters emphasized that the fallen pine tree had fallen no more than a week before the girl was found. A storm that had swept through the region was recorded in the service's reports. There were many doubts. How could Nancy have survived without sufficient water and food? How did she get into a sector that has no marked routes and is considered one of the most dangerous? Why was there no sign of Jay Brown nearby? And most importantly, what happened to her in those 30 days that no one knew about? While investigators were only drawing up preliminary hypotheses, doctors noted that it would take time to talk to her. The girl avoided contact, spoke sporadically, but kept the same green sweatshirt on her person at all times. According to medical protocols, the clothes were sent for examination only after her condition had stabilized a bit. The discovery of Nancy Anderson was a turning point in the case. The dashed hopes of the park's fans, a month of unsuccessful searches, and the weather conditions, all of this seemed to be a story that was coming to an official end. But the return of the girl from the remote sector of the forest raised a new main question for the investigation. What exactly happened to her during this month? And where did Jay Brown go? Detectives received Nancy Anderson's first testimony in the hospital the very next day after she was found. According to the interview protocol, the girl spoke quietly, in fragmentary phrases, constantly holding a green men's sweatshirt with her. The doctors asked the detectives to limit the time of the conversation, but Nancy insisted that she wanted to tell at least some of the story, so that, in her words, no one would think she was just lost. According to the investigation records, the version she gave was dramatic, and from the very first minutes directed the investigation into a criminal plane. Nancy claimed that on the day she disappeared, she and Jay allegedly wandered off the main trail to look at the coastal rocky outcroppings. It was there, she said, that they encountered a stranger, an armed adult male who she assumed lived in the woods and avoided people. The girl reported that the attack was sudden. The man allegedly hit Jay on the head with a rock and grabbed her and dragged her deep into the thicket. The detectives recorded in the report that during the story, she switched to whispering several times, trying to reproduce the behavior of her captor. He hardly spoke. He walked barefoot. He knew the forest by sight. According to Nancy, the man allegedly forced her to go to a remote area where he had a hidden dugout. The girl described the place as a hole under a tree trunk covered with boards and branches, but was unable to provide landmarks, explaining that she was tied up the entire time and moved only where he pulled me. The girl's testimony focused mainly on her alleged captivity, which Nancy said lasted for almost a month. She claimed that her husband would not allow her to move without him, threatened to kill her family, and allegedly checked the knots that tied her hands every night. One of the most emotional details recorded by detectives was her description of the escape. Nancy said that only a few days ago she had managed to loosen the ropes and chew through them with her teeth while her captor was sleeping. After that, she ran wherever she could see until she collapsed from exhaustion. When the detectives asked why she was in an area that was officially closed to tourists and far from the trail, Nancy said that her kidnapper took her in loops through the thicket, and she had no idea what part of the forest she was in. When asked about food and water, she was vague. Sometimes she said that the man threw food, and sometimes that she was given almost nothing. Some of the testimony was fragmented, and investigators noted this in their notes, suggesting that the girl may be in a state of post-traumatic shock. They also recorded her attitude towards the green clothes she was keeping with her. According to Nancy, the sweatshirt belonged to Jay. She stated that she managed to grab it at the time of the attack and didn't let go the whole time because it was the only thing left of the boyfriend. The doctors confirmed that the girl reacted violently to any attempts to take the clothes for examination, so detectives limited themselves to taking photos of the item and making visual notes. After completing the initial interview, the detectives recorded the wording in the protocol. Anderson's testimony requires verification. The events recounted contain a considerable amount of emotional description, but few specific landmarks. They also noted that at the time of the conversation, the girl could not provide even a rough description of the dugout, the routes, or the man's appearance, except that he was strong, silent, and did not like strangers in the woods. Nevertheless, her words became the initial basis for the operational version of the possible abduction. In the investigation documents, the term unidentified man appeared, who was held preliminarily responsible for Jay Brown's disappearance and Nancy's long absence. It was this version that determined the further search tactics and the scope of the forest survey, because if an armed hermit could indeed be hiding in remote areas of the park, the situation became a threat to other visitors. The recording of the conversation with Nancy ended with a brief note from the detectives. Emotional state is unstable. Answers are inconsistent, but need to be considered in detail. What she told them looked like a typical story of a prisoner's escape. What she didn't say, how she survived a month in the mountains, why she didn't contact people when she reached civilization, and why her tracks led to the wrong place from which she disappeared, was to be subject to further investigation. After Nancy Anderson's first testimony, the investigation officially turned the case into a search for an armed attacker who could have held the girl captive for 30 days. The potential kidnapper was identified as an unidentified male in internal police documents, and the Gettysburg area was declared a high-risk area. The very next day, additional patrols arrived at the park, and in the morning, an APB was published with a sketch based on Nancy's words. The image she described was generalized: beard, thin build, dark clothes. Despite the vague description, an APB was sent out to all the surrounding police stations. The police checked all those who had appeared in reports in recent months as homeless, loners, or people who were in the park without permission. Several of these people were found in neighboring counties, but none of them matched the reported descriptions or had even a minimal connection to Jay Brown's disappearance. Operatives also reviewed the archives of previous years, looking for similar cases. Although some incidents with aggressive tourists or illegal campers were recorded, nothing that would even remotely resemble Nancy's story was found. Meanwhile, the rangers returned to the sector where the girl was found. According to protocol, the area was searched within a radius of several hundred yards. Separate groups rechecked even the areas where searchers had already worked a few weeks earlier. The result was the same: no sign of a dugout, shelter, food remains, campfire marks, or distinctive shoe prints. The senior ranger's report states, "If anyone has lived here for some time, they have done so without a trace or have not lived in the area at all." The doctors who examined Nancy also began to have questions. Her physical condition did not match the described conditions of captivity. Yes, she was dehydrated and weakened, but she did not show the deep signs of exhaustion typical of prolonged confinement without regular food. There were also no characteristic signs of prolonged restraint, abrasions on her wrists, bruises, or skin irritations. One of the points in the medical report included the following wording: "The patient's general condition does not correlate with the claimed 30 days of captivity." The second alarming aspect was her testimony about daily control and interrogation by her captor. The psychologists who spoke to her noted that her stories were based mainly on general images, without specific details. No precise features of the area, no repetitive actions on the part of her husband, no mention of tools, utensils, or any items that should have been in the dugout. This became the basis for a service note about possible distortion of memory due to stress, or deliberate concealment of facts out of fear. At this time, investigators began to consider a new version: that Nancy might be afraid to name the real place where she was, or the real person who might have been involved in Jay's disappearance. The document suggested that her story could be a defense mechanism, or a way to shift responsibility to a fictional stalker. However, officially, the police still stuck to the line of a possible abduction, as they did not have enough evidence to change the direction of the investigation. Additional confusion was caused by the results of the inspection of the area. Several investigators pointed out that the area where Nancy was found was too far from the marked routes for a random criminal to have entered. Moreover, to get to this sector, one would either have to clear the rubble or have experience in moving through mountainous terrain. In his official report, the detective noted that whoever could have held the girl had a thorough knowledge of the area, or her story does not correspond to the real geography of the events. In the first days after the girl's appearance in the woods, the information pressure on the police was extremely high. Local news actively spread the version of a reclusive maniac who had allegedly been hiding in Yosemite for many years. This created additional pressure and made investigators more cautious about commenting on inconsistencies in Nancy's testimony. All public statements were reduced to the phrases "thoroughly investigating" and "working in all possible directions." But within the department, doubts were increasingly being voiced. Gradually, a working version began to take shape that the girl might be deliberately hiding the truth or some of the facts out of fear of someone in particular. Several detectives suggested that the threats she mentioned might not have come from the fictional forest man, but from someone who knew her personally, or from circumstances she did not dare to confess. A new term appears in the memos: possible cover-up by a third party. Despite the lack of evidence in favor of the existence of an unknown kidnapper, the investigation gained momentum. Police patrols combed the forest using thermal imagers and drones. Some areas were checked several times. However, the search for the ghost, as the investigators increasingly called the fictional man among themselves, yielded no results. The real questions were just beginning to take shape. Why did Nancy's testimony contradict the medical evidence? Why did the place where she was found not correspond to any of the routes she had mentioned? And most importantly, was there anyone else in this story besides Nancy herself? The answers to these questions were supposed to change the entire direction of the investigation. But at the time, the police were still in the process of hunting down someone who, as it seemed at the time, existed only in her words. The first real break in the case came when forensic scientists carefully examined the area around the fallen ponderosa pine tree where Nancy Anderson was found. The experts' report noted that among the natural debris, pieces of bark, root fragments, and old tarpaulin, were several small food wrappers that were not sold within the national park. This alerted investigators. Even if we assume that the girl had been there for some time, the source of such goods had to be outside the territory of Getcha Getcha. The wrappers were kept in sterile bags and transferred to the Material Evidence Analysis Department. Several items turned out to be rare brands of energy bars and water that were sold only in some specialty stores in small towns near national parks. One of the detectives who worked with the list of such outlets found that one of the stores in a town on the northern border of Yosemite had all the items found. The very next day, investigators arrived at the store and officially requested access to the video surveillance archives. The cameras there were old, with a grainy picture, but they allowed us to recognize people. The recordings covered the period from mid-May to early June. The detectives expected to see an unfamiliar man, possibly similar to the sketch drawn up from Nancy's words. The official materials state that this particular check was to confirm or deny the version of the kidnapper, who could have been going to civilization to get provisions. But everything changed when a girl in a dark sweatshirt with a hood pulled low over her face entered the frame on the recording, dated May 28th at about 11 o'clock in the morning. At first, the store operator, who watched the video with the detectives, assumed it was a random tourist. However, one of the investigators noticed a distinctive seam pattern on the sleeve, the same one that was on the green hoodie found in Nancy's hands at the time of her rescue. When the girl looked up, that was enough. The recording showed Nancy Anderson alive, conscious, independent, and without any restrictions on her freedom. There was no kidnapper near her. The archival footage showed Nancy calmly entering the store, heading to the food shelves, picking up a bottle of water and several energy bars. The video clearly shows her looking around, not like a person who is afraid of being chased, but like someone who is trying to avoid being recognized. The girl paid in cash and quickly left the premises, keeping her hands in her pockets and not looking back. The detective's report specifically emphasized that Nancy showed no signs of disorientation or shock during her time in the store. She clearly knew what she wanted to buy, moved confidently between the shelves, and even avoided the cameras by turning her head away when she passed the lens. The video then captured her walking outside, looking back toward the parking lot, and heading down the path that leads to the road connecting the town to the forest area. No escort, no outside influence. She was completely alone. When the detectives returned to the department, the recording was reviewed several times, comparing every movement of the girl with her testimony. The protocols state, "The fact that Nancy Anderson moved independently between the forest and the town refutes the possibility of continuous captivity." This wording was key. Another important detail was that the date of May 28th fell approximately in the middle of the period when the girl was considered missing. That is, at the time when hundreds of people were combing the forest for traces, Nancy was not only alive, but also able to leave the forest freely, interact with people, and buy food. But for some reason, she kept returning to the wilderness instead of reporting her whereabouts. The memos went on to include the wording that determined the course of the investigation. Anderson's behavior in the store was inconsistent with her status as a kidnapping victim. This fact shocked even experienced investigators. It was no longer about finding a maniac. Now it was about why the girl was lying and what she was hiding. At the time of viewing the footage, the detectives did not yet have an answer to the main question. Why did Nancy deliberately avoid people for many days, having access to the campus and the opportunity to call her mother, rescuers, or anyone from the park? The video did not provide an answer, but it did show one thing clearly. The version of captivity had fallen apart. The physical evidence seized along with Nancy Anderson at the time of her evacuation from the forest was transferred to the forensic laboratory the very next day. The green men's sweatshirt received the most attention from the experts, the same one that the girl kept clutched to her chest and did not allow any of the staff to touch. According to the internal protocol, the clothing was examined in several areas: biological, fiber, and soil. It was the combination of these data that later became the key to cracking the case. The first result was a blood test. On the front of the sweatshirt, as well as on the right sleeve, they found large, dark spots that had penetrated several layers of fabric. Experts noted that the nature of the spreading was not chaotic, but concentrated, and came from prolonged contact with an open wound. The conclusion stated that this type of stain is formed when clothing is used as a means of stopping bleeding and pressed against the wound for a long time. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Jay Brown. However, the most important thing was yet to come. During a microscopic examination of the inside of the sleeves, where the material comes into contact with the skin, experts found significant amounts of sweat salts, epithelial microparticles, and fat. All of these traces were genetically matched to Nancy. The key was that they lay on top of Jay's dried blood, meaning they were formed after the stains had completely dried. The lab report clearly states, "The sequence of layering indicates that the item was worn by Anderson for a long period of time after Brown's blood had been exposed to the fabric." In other words, the sweatshirt was not just held in her hands, but worn on her body for a considerable period of time. This fact was difficult to reconcile with the testimony of Nancy, who claimed that she had ripped the sweatshirt off Jay at the time of the attack and was unable to put it on afterwards due to constant control by the kidnapper. However, the examination showed the opposite. The girl wore this item systematically, not sporadically. Then came the results of the soil analysis, which was retained in the fibers of the cuffs. The particles had a characteristic mineral composition that was unique to one particular area of the park, a narrow gorge 2 miles from where the girl was found. It was a steep, rocky area, rarely visited even by experienced hikers. An internal note from the geological laboratory stated that this soil was difficult to confuse with other soil because it contained a rare combination of bituminous shale and limestone fragments. This coincidence was extremely important because Nancy never mentioned being in the gorge. Moreover, according to her, she spent almost all of her time in a dugout, a place that did not exist on any map and that the rangers could not find. But the soil stuck in the fibers of the cuffs of her sweatshirt showed something else. The girl had been in that gorge for some time, perhaps even a long time. Experts speculated that she could have been moving around on all fours or touching the ground with her hands. This was consistent with the nature of the contamination. In his conclusion, the forensic expert put it this way: the contamination was not accidental, but the result of active contact with the soil in the area. The person was either crawling or working with his hands on an uneven surface. The report was also updated to clarify how long the sweatshirt had been worn. Based on the degree of salting of the internal fibers and the nature of sebum accumulation, it was estimated that the item had been worn for at least several weeks, and regularly. Nancy wore it during the period when she claims to have been held captive, but the examination found no evidence that the garment had been removed or worn under duress. The laboratory also examined tears and abrasions. They were natural and did not indicate a struggle or forced removal of the clothes. The experts emphasized that the hoodie was worn as a basic piece of clothing, not as a casual item. When the detectives received the full report, it changed the situation dramatically. The version of the kidnapping began to look less and less convincing. And most importantly, the materials for the first time indicated that Nancy might have known about places that she herself had never mentioned in any of her testimonies. The conclusion that the investigators wrote in an internal memo was brief. The data collected contradicts the stated story of captivity. Anderson's behavior needs to be assessed for possible intent to conceal the events. The version of the intimidated victim fell apart completely. The final interrogation of Nancy Anderson, according to the protocol, took place in the office of the investigative department in the presence of 2 detectives and a psychologist. At that time, the investigators already had video footage from the store, the results of a soil test, biological analysis of the sweatshirt, and data on the time she could have left the forest. All of these materials were laid out in front of the girl, not to put pressure, but to record her reactions. Every gesture, every pause was recorded in the protocol. The official documents state that at first, Nancy tried to repeat the previous version of the armed man, avoiding looking at the photos and video footage. However, when the detectives put an image from the store in front of her, which showed her entering the store on her own, taking water, paying and leaving, the girl changed her behavior dramatically. According to the psychologist, at that moment, her defense mechanism failed, and for the first time during the entire interrogation, she looked directly at the investigator. An entry appeared in the protocol. After the demonstration of the video evidence, Anderson began to sob and showed signs of complete emotional exhaustion. A few minutes later, she stated that she wanted to give truthful testimony. The exact words were not quoted, but detectives noted that the confession was made voluntarily and without further questions. After a short pause, the girl described the events of May 12th, the day she and Jay went to Wapama Falls. According to the testimony recorded in the official protocol, the conflict between the teenagers began on the approach to the section of the route where a narrow path runs along the rocky slopes. Nancy said that the reason was jealousy, a banal argument that quickly turned into an emotional outburst. Jay allegedly reacted sharply to her words, after which the girl, by her own admission, without thinking, pushed him to the side, trying to push him away from her. The documents indicate that this part of the route has an increased risk of falling after rains, and previous downpours made the stones slippery. Nancy confirmed that the push was not strong, but enough to make the boy lose his balance. He stepped back, slipped, and disappeared over the edge of the ledge. The girl claims that she immediately heard a dull thud. According to the investigation, it could have been a head injury from hitting a stone during the fall. When she went down into the shallow gorge, she saw Jay unconscious and bleeding heavily. The report contains a description. The girl tried to clamp the wound with the green clothes he was wearing over his t-shirt. She said that at that moment, she was thinking of nothing but trying to stop the blood. Forensic experts later confirmed that the nature of the stains on the fabric did indeed indicate prolonged pressure on the wound. Nancy said that the boy was conscious for only a moment and tried to say something, but quickly fainted again. In their official report, the detectives noted, Anderson stated that she realized the inevitable consequences and panicked. It was at this point, in her own words, that she made the choice not to return. She said that she was afraid of possible punishment and her mother's reaction, and even more so of the thought that she would be accused of murder. Psychologists called this reaction typical for minors who face a shocking situation and are unable to assess the legal consequences. Then, according to her, she put stones and branches on the body to hide the traces of the fall. Detectives noted that Nancy spoke about this moment in a state of emotional detachment, as if she were describing actions that she performed mechanically. She took a small amount of money from Jay's pockets, his green sweatshirt, and moved toward the woods, away from the route and away from people. At that moment, according to Nancy, she did not have a clear plan. She just walked where she could not hear voices and could not see paths. Later, when she heard the sounds of a helicopter, she said she hid even deeper. The girl explained that she felt afraid of being found and did not want to be brought back to the place where the body was lying. This fear, according to psychologists, was the driver of her subsequent behavior. The testimony confirms that she bought food in the nearest towns, going out only at night or in the early morning. The protocol states that Nancy knew about the search teams and even heard her name called several times, but ran away, hiding in the thickets. She explained that she couldn't let them find her before she had a plausible explanation. According to her, the story about the kidnapper appeared in the last days before she was found. She admitted that at first she wanted to report an accident, but was afraid that she would not be believed. The report states, Anderson believed that a fictitious story about being captured and attacked by an unknown person would absolve her of responsibility and help her avoid punishment. The girl confirmed that she specifically linked her behavior to false signs of traumatic experience to support the false version. In the final pages of the report, investigators wrote that Nancy's behavior over the course of a month was the result of panic, fear, and gradual involvement in her own fictional story. She did not deny that she heard search teams nearby. She did not deny that she had the opportunity to go out to people, call, ask for help. But instead, she continued to avoid everyone, trying to keep her secret until she lost her strength and ended up under the same fallen tree where the biologists found her. Now the investigation had one last thing to do: to verify her words about the place where she left Jay Brown's body. At the time, investigators did not know that this part of the story would be confirmed to the last detail. The next morning, in mid-June 2018, Nancy Anderson was taken under escort back to Yosemite National Park. Official documents indicate that she agreed to cooperate with the investigation only after she made a full confession and signed a protocol under the supervision of a lawyer and a psychologist. The purpose of the visit was one: to confirm or deny her words about the place where she left Jay Brown's body. The convoy consisted of 2 patrol cars, 1 ambulance, and an off-road vehicle of the rescue service. According to the protocol, the girl was accompanied by 2 detectives and 1 paramedic. She behaved quietly, kept her arms crossed, and, according to one of the escorts, looked out the window as if she was seeing a familiar area for the first time. The psychologist's report of that day stated, Anderson's condition is depressed, reactions are slow, but she answers questions and shows no signs of aggression. Upon arrival at the Getch-Hetch-Hetchy area, Nancy was led to the beginning of the route, explaining that she would have to point out the direction while moving on the ground. The detectives turned off their body cameras during the climb as official recording began on the 2nd stage. When she approached an area she could identify as the scene of the incident. As the group passed the Wapam Trail and moved hundreds of yards into the distance, Nancy began to look back and forth, looking up at the slopes. In the report of these events, the investigator noted, Anderson had a fragmentary knowledge of the area, but was confident in navigating side branches and rocky passages that ordinary hikers never use. This was confirmed by the results of the soil analysis found on her clothes. Later, the girl stopped at a narrow stone crevice where she said she had descended that May day. She pointed to the spot, describing it as the one I was trying to forget. The rescuers went down first, using ropes and protective helmets, as the gorge was steep and dangerous in places. A few minutes later, a short radio message was sent from the rescuers. We have human remains. The report of the officer who first discovered the body states that under a layer of rocks and dry branches were bones, partially preserved by shade and lack of access by large animals. Nearby were decayed remains of clothing that matched the clothes Jay Brown was wearing that day. The medical examiner, who was called to the scene immediately, examined the skull and found a characteristic injury in the back of the head. In his preliminary report, he stated, the head injury is compatible with a fall from a height to a hard surface. There are no signs of post-traumatic impact of foreign objects. This was a direct confirmation of the version described by Nancy during the interrogation. Special attention was paid to the way the body was covered with stones. The investigators who recorded the body noted, the pile of stones was formed randomly, but with obvious attempts to cover the upper part of the body. This is an important detail. The formation of the cover did not look like the work of an outsider who wanted to conceal the crime, but rather a spontaneous, disturbing action of a person in a state of shock. However, the very fact of concealment had legal significance. It meant deliberate concealment of information and an attempt to prevent the consequences of the event. After the official confirmation of the place of Jay Brown's death, the investigation moved to the final stage. Investigators handed over the materials to the district prosecutor's office, where the charges were filed based on testimony, medical evidence, and forensic findings. A special emphasis in the case was placed on the fact that Nancy had deliberately evaded rescue for a long time and repeatedly concealed information that could have led to Jay in the first hours after his fall. Prosecutors described it not as premeditated murder, but as unintentional causing of death with deliberate obstruction of justice. The judge scheduled several hearings for the mother to clarify the details. No circumstances were established that would indicate that the pushing was intentional or intended to cause death. However, it is documented that the girl avoided people for many days, even knowing about the large-scale search. According to the investigation, she was several times at a distance from which she could hear the loudspeakers of the rescue services, but still hid. In the transcripts of the court hearings, the prosecutor emphasized the long and systematic planning to avoid responsibility and the fictitious story about the kidnapper, which was voiced to mislead the police. It was also pointed out that the use of details about an armed man could have diverted significant resources and endangered other tourists. The court found these factors to be aggravating. When the judge delivered his judgment, he stated, "Anderson Nancy is found guilty of unintentionally causing the death of Jay Brown, as well as of deliberately obstructing the investigation by concealing the circumstances of the incident and misleading law enforcement." The sentence included imprisonment, the term of which was determined taking into account the girl's minor age at the time of the incident, but without the possibility of probation. For the community, the case was a shocking example of how a simple hike to a popular waterfall can end in an easily avoidable tragedy. Yosemite, long associated with safe nature and structured routes, suddenly appears in the news as a place where people not only get lost but also invent legends to escape the consequences of their own actions. For investigators, the case was another reminder. The scariest stories in the forest are not always about predators or maniacs. Sometimes they are born out of fear, panic, and the human inability to recognize the truth. The day the trial ended, the park remained as quiet as it had been when the couple disappeared. But the investigators knew that this silence hid a story in which nature was neither enemy nor witness, in which all decisions and all consequences belonged to one man who tried to wait for the truth in the shadows of Yosemite's forests.